So why aren't the Gulf states joining the war? Why haven't they attacked yet? That's a question that we're going to answer in this video. But the main topic we're going to deal with before we get to that question and my theory, my ideas about it, so stick around for that. The main thing we're going to talk about is the Saudis. The Saudis are really annoyed at being attacked by the Iranians, and we're going to get into all the details. But before we do that, please make sure to go over to Israel365charity.com, Israel365charity.com, and you can click on the banner near the top of the page. Israel is under fire, or scroll down to the current projects and go there where you have the current projects. Israel is at war, help now, and you can click on that, and it'll take you through to the page for this campaign. And we're helping lots of families that are struggling with a lot of different challenges due to the shelling from Iran that are taking place, especially with Passover coming 2 weeks from now. There are a lot of people stuck at home. Kids are stuck at home. Mothers stuck with their kids while they're also preparing for Passover. A lot of financial needs. Husbands away fighting in reserve duty. A lot of struggles, and Israel 365 is plugged in with a lot of great charities on the ground. We'll get your dollars into the right hands, and it's a great way to participate at this time with easing the burden on the Israeli home front. All right, let's get right to this story. So we'll start with a statement from the Saudi foreign minister from earlier today. This is Saudi Arabia's foreign minister earlier today. Have a look at this.
I don't know how they claim to be fighting for Islamic causes while attacking Islamic countries. They are not attacking a single nation. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, Oman, Lebanon, Jordan, Azerbaijan, Turkey. All these countries are Islamic countries, yet Iran attacks them. And even before this war, what was Iran's contribution in the issues related to the Islamic world? They support the Houthi militia in Yemen. They supported the popular militia in Iraq, and now they are attacking Iraq. They are attacking Iraq territories, Hezbollah in Lebanon, who didn't suffice by hijacking the political decision in Lebanon, but rather was an effective arm to perform sabotaging actions in the region and in Saudi Arabia. And the biggest example is Iran and Hezbollah's role in Syria. So where is such support or so-called support in the Muslim world when they commit such crimes and supporting the former Syrian regime? How do they support the Islamic world when they assassinate politicians in Lebanon? How do they support the Muslim world's issues and causes when they empower the popular mobilization forces in Iraq, hindering the development efforts in Iraq? I can't see how they support the Islamic causes. I believe these are simple slogans which they hide behind it, and these tools, they work to serve the Iranian interests rather than the slogans they claim. Thank you.
Okay. So this is a little bit of a game he's playing here, because you notice that he calls out their support for their proxies across the region, and he lists the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the popular militias in Iraq, and then later the Assad government in Syria that was propped up by the Iranians. All of those, okay, the Hezbollah is Shiite, the Houthis are Shiite, different kind of Shiite than Hezbollah, but they're Shiites as well. The popular resistance or the popular militias in Iraq, also Shiites. And the Assad regime was Alawite, sort of secular. Okay. Notice that he didn't mention Hamas, which is a Sunni terrorist group that was also a proxy or funded and supported by the Iranian regime. Notice he didn't call them out for supporting Hamas. That also might have to do with Israel and not signaling that he's being too pro-Israel. But the reason I say it's a little bit of a game is that if you've been following this channel, you've been following my videos, I've been talking about this a fair bit lately, that Shiites and Sunnis see each other as heretics. They don't see each other as two denominations of the same religion, like Reform Jews and Orthodox Jews, or different kinds of Protestants. No, they don't see themselves as part of the same religion at all. They actually see themselves as heretics, as kuffar. There are many experts on Islam who even say that Sunni and Shia Islam are really like two different religions. They're that different. They have different eschatology. There's two chapters in the Shia Quran that don't exist in the Sunni Quran, so their scriptures aren't even the same. And what he's basically saying in this speech here is they're not part of the Muslim world. They have nothing to do with Muslim interests. They're not part of Islam. That's what he's really signaling here. But this goes together with what they're so upset about. The reason that this statement was made today is because of these attacks. Saudi official warns patience is limited as Iranian attacks Barraj Kingdom. Prince Faisal bin Farhan, the foreign minister, that's what we just saw in that clip, said Saudi Arabia was prepared to take military action if necessary after waves of missile and drone attacks. Now, in this New York Times headline, that is not exactly what he said, and I'll show you what I mean. It's actually I think it's pretty significant. Hours after 8 ballistic missiles exploded over the Saudi capital, the kingdom's foreign minister warned that his government had limited patience with Iran. And this should also be in quotes. I saw this quote also on Arab News, which is a Saudi-owned news outlet. And there, the reserved the right was also in quotes. So he actually said that they reserve the right to take military actions if deemed necessary, which is different than saying they're prepared to take military action. Is it a subtle difference? Reserving the right, saying they're prepared to take military action sounds like they're getting ready to attack. And the fact that the statement was just that they reserve the right to take military action and they're losing patience. What they're doing here is they're being the Saudis. The Saudis are always very slippery. You see, the Saudis and the other Gulf states do not actually want to attack the Iranians. They don't want to be part of this kinetically. They don't want to do that. And even if they do, I'm not sure that the Israelis and the Americans want them to. I know everyone's speculating, why haven't they entered the war? They look like wimps. I think the main purpose of this entire statement is to cover the Saudi Arabians from looking like wimps and threatening to attack, making it seem like they're threatening, but it's not a direct threat. You notice he's just saying that they're losing patience and they reserve the right to take military action. And then he says, we will not shy away from protecting our country and our economic resources. Now, when asked what would prompt a military response, the prince declined to elaborate. Quote, do they have a day, 2, a week? I'm not going to telegraph that. See, this isn't really a threat of kinetic action. It's a threat of kinetic action. He added that what little trust there was between the kingdom and Iran had been completely shattered. The countries re-established diplomatic relations in 2023. Okay, let me explain what that is about, because this is such important background information. We almost don't know what's going on unless we know it. Okay, let's go back to 2016, 10 years ago. Let's just look at the last 10 years. In early January of 2016, Saudi Arabia executed a prominent Shiite cleric named Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, along with dozens of others. Iran's population and political figures, so this was a Shiite cleric in Saudi Arabia, which is mostly Sunni. He was executed. Okay, so Iran's political figures were outraged and there were demonstrations in Tehran over this. A small group of protesters in Iran stormed and burned parts of the Saudi embassy and the consulate in Iran, which Saudi Arabia viewed as a severe breach of diplomatic norms. So in retaliation, the Saudis severed diplomatic ties with Iran at the time. That's 2016. They cut off all diplomatic relations with Iran. They expelled Iranian diplomats. They closed their embassy in Tehran. And that caused a massive diplomatic crisis in the Middle East, which led directly to a formal suspension of diplomatic relations between the countries. So from 2016, it wasn't just closing the embassy. From 2016 to 2023, there were no diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which of course has a lot to do with the sectarian disagreements that I mentioned before about Shiite and Sunni, but also just strategic rivalry between them. In the middle of all this, on September 14th, 2019, Saudi Arabia's major oil installations at Abqaiq and Kurais, we'll get to that in a minute where they are because it matters here, they were hit by drone and missile strikes. Okay, and so this is 2019. So these strikes on Saudi assets that we saw today, which we'll get into a little bit more, those strikes on Saudi assets today, on Saudi oil refinery today, it was not the first time that oil installations were hit by the Iranians. This is 2019. So they were hit by drone and missile strikes, and that cut Saudi oil production by about half at the time. It was a major shock to global energy markets. That's 2019. And the Saudis and their Western allies blamed Iran or its proxies. They mainly blamed it on the Houthis. And Iran denied official involvement. They denied direct involvement. Saudi Arabia and Iran announced the restoration of diplomatic relations in 2023 in a deal that was mediated by China. Okay, so that's important here also. China brought the Saudis and the Iranians back together. Both countries at that time agreed to reopen their embassies and resume full diplomatic missions by mid-2023. Okay, now, and it include, and this new friendship included a visit by Iranian President Raisi. He visited Saudi Arabia and participating together in important summits, including a summit, an Islamic Arab summit on Gaza that they were both at. And the Saudi defense minister, Prince Khalid bin Salman, delivered a direct message from the Saudi king to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, emphasizing the expansion of their bilateral ties and cooperation. That was all part of it, that there's a letter from the king to the supreme leader. Everyone's getting along. And over the past couple of years, Iranian and Saudi officials have had regular bilateral talks about regional security, about Yemen, about broader cooperation. So things were actually in a very good place before this war. Iran's foreign minister visited Saudi Arabia for, and that was unheard of in the years before that. Now, they also share interest in the Palestinian cause, as they've shown. So they were in a good place before this war. In fact, they were in the best place they had been in many, many years. And let's remember, it was all brokered by the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, so that's the background on this whole relationship. So let's put everything that's happening now into that context. When you see the foreign minister get up there and say they have nothing to do with Muslim interests and what are they doing and they're attacking everyone, this isn't a brand new breach. It's not like they had been friends all along. Okay. Now today, here's the big flap. A drone crashed into Saudi Arabia's Samref refinery. So what's this about? A drone crashed into a refinery on Saudi Arabia's Red Sea coast on Thursday. The drone hit the Samref refinery in the port of Yanbu, a Ministry of Defense spokesman said, adding that the damage assessment is underway. Shortly before, the ministry said a ballistic missile launched towards Yanbu port was intercepted and destroyed. So there was a drone attack and there was an attempted ballistic missile attack on Yanbu port. Yanbu, we'll get to it in a second. We'll show you what it is. Samref is the Samref refinery is an equally owned joint venture between Saudi Aramco and ExxonMobil through its subsidiary Mobil Yanbu Refining Company. Why is that in here? Maybe to say that it's also an American asset. It is one of the leading refineries in the Middle East, producing more than 400,000 barrels per day of Arabian light crude oil. The refinery's location on the Red Sea is on the opposite side of the kingdom from the Arabian Gulf and is not restricted by Iran's blockade of the Straits of Hormuz. The attack comes as Iran continues to target energy facilities in Arab Gulf countries in response to an Israeli attack on their main gas field on Wednesday. And then it talks about how the other Gulf states have been have suffered damage to their oil, to their oil refineries and their oil assets. Drones continue to be intercepted and destroyed elsewhere in Saudi Arabia throughout Thursday. Okay, and then yeah, that's that. So let me explain what's going on here. Let's pull out a map. Let's pull out a map. Okay. So where is Yanbu? Yanbu is here. Okay, let me zoom in on that. You see that? This is right here. This is Yanbu. Okay, right here, Yanbu. This is Yanbu right here, Yanbu. Now let's zoom out and see where it is. Okay, let's zoom out. So Yanbu is right here. Iran is up here. Here's this where this red thing is. That's where the Straits of Hormuz are. Okay, that's the Straits of Hormuz. That's where all the action is. Okay, so you have here is Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Iran up here, and all the fighting. The Americans trying to open the Straits of Hormuz, all the oil coming out of Kuwait, coming out of Bahrain, Qatar, Emirates, all this oil flows through the Straits of Hormuz. And that's why this is the big headline these days, where the Iranians are trying to disrupt their whole strategy. And I talked about this even before the war. Iran's whole strategy is to drive up the price of oil, which they're doing successfully, to prolong the war and make this thing as painful for President Trump economically, diplomatically, and in every way possible, so that the war ends before the regime falls. That is their strategy, plain and simple. They're not trying to win. They're trying to cause major disruptions around the world. They're also 12er Shiites and looking for chaos, because that's all part of their religious view. But you see the Straits of Hormuz, and the Iranians are firing a ballistic missile all the way across Saudi Arabia to Yanbu, all the way down here, and firing a drone at it. Why are they going after Yanbu? Well, you might say because it's a big refinery. But there are major oil fields. When I just gave you that history and about how in 2019 the Houthis attacked oil assets in Saudi Arabia, and the Iranians were blamed. So you might think that the Houthis attacked something near them. No, they did not. What they attacked, the two names given in that story that I just read, were Kurez and Abakik. So where are Kurez and Abakik? Let me show you. Kurez is the same map with Kurez marked off. Here's Kurez. Look where it is. Here's Iran. Here's the Straits of Hormuz. Yanbu's all the way over here. And in 2019, the Kurez oil field was attacked, and Abakik, which is even further away. Abakik's right here. Okay, Abakik is here, and Kurez is here. Kurez Aramco. That's what it's even called. It's even named after the airport's named after the oil company. Okay, so what's going on? Why are they going after Yanbu? Why don't they just attack Abakik and Kurez? Why are they attacking Yanbu? Well, this has to do with what Yanbu is. So there is a pipeline. There's a pipeline called the East-West Crude Oil Pipeline that was built by the Saudis. I'll just read from Wikipedia, just the opening couple sentences here. The East-West Pipeline, also known as a Petroline, is 746 miles long, and it runs from the Abakik oil field in eastern province near Bahrain and Qatar on the Persian Gulf Coast, across the width of the Arabian Peninsula to Yanbu at the Red Sea. Here's the key sentence. It was built during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s to allow Saudi Arabian oil exports to bypass the tanker war and the Strait of Hormuz. So here, let me explain. Here is the pipeline. There is a pipeline that runs from Abakik all the way across. And you see it comes down a little bit, so it picks up oil also at Kurez, and it goes all the way across to Yanbu. And the point of it is, because here's Oman, here's the UAE, Saudi Arabia has a coast in the Persian Gulf, and it has a coast in the Red Sea. So the whole point of this pipeline is to not depend on the Straits of Hormuz, that they can instead of putting their oil out into the Persian Gulf, even though the oil fields are very close to the Persian Gulf, they can send the oil through the pipeline and have it come out to the water and then either go south and out this way to the east, or it can go up into the Suez Canal or up to the port of Eilat through the pipeline to Ashkelon, out to the Mediterranean, out to Europe. That's the point of this pipeline. The UAE built a similar pipeline, a shorter pipeline, because the UAE, the very tip up here is not UAE. It's part of Oman. Oman is actually split. It owns the tip here on the Straits of Hormuz, and then it's down here. So the UAE built a pipeline to its coast outside the Straits of Hormuz, also to circumvent the Straits of Hormuz. Okay, but that's not necessarily relevant to the Saudi Arabian topic that we're discussing. Okay, so you see how, so now we got it, right? We have the Iranians are trying to sabotage. Why'd they fire a drone at Yanbu? Now it should make perfect sense. They are trying, the Samref refinery in Yanbu is the end of the line. That's where the crude oil that comes through that pipeline gets refined on the western coast by the Red Sea before going off to Europe or wherever else it's going to go. And the Iranians are trying to cause maximum disruption to global oil prices. So this escape route for oil, as it were, this pipeline that the Saudis are now ramping up and using, it has a capacity of maybe 7 million barrels a day at most, which is not enough. It's not enough to to undo the damage of closing the Straits of Hormuz, but it is enough to mitigate it, to mitigate the damage. So the Iranians are attacking Yanbu port to prevent oil from getting out that way. That's what that is all actually about. Now, just to round out the picture here, here's a video, here's a short clip of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman years ago talking about Ali Khamenei on 60 Minutes.
Iran is not a rival to Saudi Arabia. Its army is not among the top 5 armies in the Muslim world. The Saudi economy is larger than the Iranian economy. Iran is far from being equal to Saudi Arabia.
But I've seen that you called the Ayatollah Khamenei the new Hitler of the Middle East.
Absolutely.
Why?
Because he wants to expand. He wants to create his own project in the Middle East, very much like Hitler, who wanted to expand at the time. Many countries around the world and in Europe did not realize how dangerous Hitler was until what happened happened. I don't want to see the same events happening in the Middle East.
Does Saudi Arabia need nuclear weapons to counter Iran?
Saudi Arabia does not want to acquire any nuclear bomb. But without a doubt, if Iran developed a nuclear bomb, we will follow suit as soon as possible.
Okay. So we see there's no love lost. Now, I said at the beginning of this video that I would give you my take on why the Gulf states, the Saudis included, have not entered the war. And I actually don't believe they will kinetically. So I'll give you a few reasons. Because people have been talking about this. Even someone said to me today in the office, hey, are they wimps? How come they're not joining the war? And you might notice that President Trump has not been criticizing them for not joining the war. He's been criticizing the Europeans for not helping out with the Straits of Hormuz, but he's not criticizing the Gulf states, who are also being protected by the Americans. He's not criticizing them for not joining the war. So here's my theory. My theory is that the Israelis and the Americans have a very complex and detailed cooperation going on. Right? This whole war, they're working side by side. Their armies are working, they're dividing up responsibilities of who's bombing what, and now they're actually working on different projects. The Americans are focused on Hormuz and Karg Island, and the Israelis are more focused on regime targets and continuing to degrade the ballistic missiles launchers and other things on the homeland in Iran and knocking out the IRGC wherever they are. But the point is that the Americans and the Israelis are working hand in glove, very complex cooperation and battle plans. What are they going to do if the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and the Qataris decide that they want to get involved? They're going to get into the Situation Room and incorporate their militaries into this complex partnership? Do they even have the capabilities that the Israelis and Americans have? I don't think the Americans and the Israelis want the Gulf states getting involved. It adds in other elements to the military activity, to the kinetic activity that they might not want to deal with. I don't think they want those militaries involved. What are they going to add? What is there part of the job that the Israelis and Americans can't handle themselves, that these Qatari pilots are going to be able to handle, that the Saudi pilots are going to be able to handle? I don't think it does anything for the war effort, and I don't think the Americans and Israelis need them around helping out. Now, I'll also add that as an Israeli, I don't want them involved, because if this is think about it politically, if this is a coalition of a whole bunch of nations fighting Iran, if that's what this turns into, rather than the US and Israel partnership fighting Iran, which it's been until now, if it's a whole coalition, then when the dust settles, Israel is not part, the victory is less Israel's. And I'm not just talking about credit, but the way things tend to work is that the old-fashioned term is to the victor goes the spoils, but basically the victorious side does have some ability to dictate terms. And right now it's a partnership between the Israelis and Americans to add in the element of these other Arab nations who will now say that they were part of the victory over Iran. That what leverage does it give them in the decision making that takes place after the war is over? I don't want that. Why would anyone want that on our side? And there's other ways that these nations can help the war effort. They can help the war effort with economically. They can help the war effort in terms of messaging, statements like the statement today from the foreign minister. There's various intelligence using their territory. There's all kinds of other ways that they can help diplomatically, all kinds of ways that they can help that don't involve helping out kinetically. I understand why they have why they have to put out the messaging that they're willing to, but I'm not so sure we even want them in the fight. So that's my take on the whole Saudi situation. Let me know what you think. Drop a comment in there, and please continue to share and like and subscribe and all that jazz. I really appreciate it. God bless.